So thanks, Greg, for joining this conversation about uh, communication. And, it's part of a longer series for Portland Shambhala. And my question is, what does meditation have to do with communication?
Yeah, it's the particular perspective that I'm teaching, offering is from Susan Gillis Chapman, Acharya Chapman, and the perspective that she pulls in coming out of the Shambhala tradition is the idea that we have some particular natural connection to our experience that is good. We have some good basis, beneath all of our trouble that we have that's obvious. We can't ignore that. We have various challenges and disconnects and things that happen, but there is some good basis. And the idea is that the same benefit we get from meditation practice, which is to reconnect with ourselves in a very gentle, direct, genuine way, that is the exact same process that we need in order to connect with others. And this is, I think, actually a really helpful view. It's really straightforward. The idea that, connecting here, me connecting with myself, what happens? What happens is that now I'm back in connection with my sense of hearing, with my sense of seeing, and with my emotions, and with my curiosity and my intellect and all these good things. And I can actually, that automatically connects me with the room I'm in and with who's in that room and what's going on with them. What do I see happening as suddenly their eyes shift, or their forehead wrinkles, or their tone of voice changes, or whatever. And that changes the kind of natural responsiveness I have in a conversation, in a situation. That's true even when I'm alone, actually, in that room, just seeing colors and hearing sounds and feeling my body. There's almost like always a natural conversation, you could say, but it's especially true when I'm with somebody else. So meditation then is the way that we remember. It's one very powerful way that we remember how to connect inside and outside.
So it strikes me that an aspect of meditation that I've experienced is that it's a process that occurs over an hour, over a week, or a year, or maybe a lifetime. And so I call that training. And I'm wondering whether you think that, so what's the equivalent training for communication?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's a really good way to frame it. The idea that it's training, and it's not a quick fix. It's a slow, steady build that we have, right? So that's what we notice with meditation. It just, bit by bit, you get to know yourself better. But there sometimes can be this disconnect where when we're sitting on the cushion, we feel like we know what we're doing. Like I can kind of remember why I'm here, what I'm doing. And we jump into a conversation, particularly one that challenges us, and that can kind of fly out the window. Like I suddenly, all of that is not relevant. All of my meditation training, my Buddhist training, that's not relevant, because now I have to deal with reality, which is so funny because the word Dharma means reality, right? But anyway, somehow we get a mental disconnect that way. So the idea here, and I think the phrase that I'm using for this particular little short program, relational meditation, is the idea that when you're in conversation with somebody, that too is training. That too is meditation. And I think what's particularly helpful with Susan Chapman's material is it helps us tune into a few basic states that we get into as human beings. And these aren't things nobody's ever experienced. These are things that we experience every day, multiple times a day. And we use these as kind of the objects of mindfulness, the way that you might return to your breath, return your attention to your breath in sitting practice. We use it here, that these states, both inside myself and inside whoever I'm talking to, as best I can perceive that, we're using that to help us return to the present moment and actually really acknowledge what's going on in the present moment, instead of, me being locked into some agenda I have of what I want to say to this person, no matter what state they're in, or no matter what state I'm in, and it's so often, I think, in our culture, we get locked into our head and locked into some idea we have of what procedure is supposed to happen. Or our emotion just comes and clobbers us and drags us off in some particular direction. And this keeps, either way, we lose the present moment. Or we lose our body. That's the other thing too. We lose our sense of our body. So we're not actually listening. We're not actually feeling. And the question is, how do we come back? How do we come back? Just like with meditation, how do we come back and come back and come back? And conversation can be a completely valid training ground, just like sitting on the cushion.
So I guess my last question is, what if I don't think that usually my body is fighting me. Often I think my mind is fighting me, but how useful is training is as this kind of communication training when the person I'm talking to is fighting me? It's like a battle.
Right. Well, that's actually a very important point. It's a very important point in the conversation, when there is some sort of disconnect or a schism. This is where we try to look to these fundamental states. Somebody could be fighting me for multiple reasons. Somebody could be fighting me because they're really trying to open up the situation. And there's some sort of alarm call that's going on that they're trying to raise. So they're fighting not to defeat me or to move against me as a human being, but to raise a kind of alarm, right? So that's a very kind of open state of conflict. Somebody could be fighting me because they're in a state of real anxiety, and it's kind of expressing itself in all directions. And really, they're having a kind of personal crisis in that moment that actually needs to get dealt with properly. And then the third, somebody could be fighting me because they have, what we would say, they've disconnected from some part of themselves. Maybe it's their mind, maybe it's their heart, maybe it's their body, or some combination. But as they've disconnected from themselves, they disconnect from the external world. This is a kind of shutdown state that's particularly problematic. And in that case, there's in all three of these cases, there's really different things we need to do. You know what I mean? The open kind of conflict is a completely different situation than the anxiety-driven conflict, which is a completely different situation from somebody who's in a shutdown state. And in terms of what I would do in any of those situations is quite different. In fact, it could be literally the opposite instructions or the opposite guidelines of what we would do. So that's part of what we want to get into is, what does the reality of the situation bring up as as an open way to deal with all three of those.
So I think that's a fabulous call to action on which to end this conversation.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for the invitation for the conversation, John.
Thank you.
You.
You know, I'm learning how to do a new kind of conversation in these video things.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's kind of sometimes a little bit dicey. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.